Okay, in this quick video lecture, we're going to be covering the symbolic interactionist perspective. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of this theory. It is one of the four major theories as discussed in the introduction of the textbook. This theory is a micro-level theory, meaning that it's much more small scale. It is much more focused on what's happening at the individual level and in like small groups. The big question that this theory seeks to explain is how do people understand and ultimately give meaning to their social world? This theory sees the world as being constructed of symbols. Now, symbols surround us everywhere, and things like you typically may be thinking of a symbol as being something like a stop sign or a letter, and those are definitely a symbol. But in this theory, any object that we assign meaning, whether it's concrete or abstract, is a symbol. So symbols can be anything from, physical things that we can touch, like tables and cars and houses and the clothes that we wear. But it can also be very abstract in terms of bigger ideas like, you know, um, justice, freedom. What does greed mean? What does it mean to be able to have sympathy or empathy for another person? Um, those are more abstract such ideas, but we have to give meaning to them. And meanings can vary from one person to another. However, we tend to have this kind of larger shared meanings. Um, and those shared meanings are extremely important because they allow us to act. They allow us to be able to communicate with one another, but they also allow us to choose appropriate behavior patterns. Understanding that in a classroom, um, that you face forward because you have that shared meaning that teachers stand in the front and that's who you're supposed to be looking. All of that seems really common sense, but if you can realize that without having those shared meanings, life would be chaotic. So those kind of meanings allow us to act. This theory will see that that interaction that we have with one another is key to social life and being able to understand our social world. Social interaction is possible. Again, I can't iterate this enough because of those shared meanings. And we achieve those shared meanings through processes of socialization. So we spend a lot of time in those very early years with children teaching them concepts that are extremely important. When I'm in a classroom, I often will tell students that red does not necessarily inherently have to mean stop, but for children, it's extremely important to have them link those two words together. So we very quickly teach children that in terms of behaviors, that stop means bad, or that red means bad, and that you should stop. And they'll learn that there's no reason that red has to mean that. It's that we've given that and it has a shared meaning. But those shared meanings allow us to interact so that when we're driving down the road, when we see that red sign at the corner, we know that it's time for our vehicle to stop and to look both ways. Or for children to see a red stop sign and that color and know that maybe that's not something they should touch. We quite often use red with the symbol of hot and often, combine, symbols of hot and stop signs and whatnot and the slashes all together. And even children really quickly know that maybe it's something they shouldn't be doing. So we do have a lot of shared meanings, but that doesn't mean that there isn't variance because we all go through life having our own experiences, and those experiences shape how we interpret and understand our social world. One of the things as an instructor that I realize that, like, for instructors, we tend to think that the time that the class ends is definitely when it's defined. So when I teach at 10 o'clock in the morning, if it's a 50-minute class, I think 10:50, that's when my class ends. And so I'm going to keep talking till 10:50. However, students can often negotiate that when they start packing up their bags and making a commotion of doing so. Um, I also talked about last night in these webcam classes when I ask questions and the students no longer are responding and it's getting very quiet, and I realize that the students are literally um, not as engaged as they once were. That's one way of negotiating um, shared meanings about when the class is supposed to end. So though in my mind, we're supposed to go till 9:30, when the students are distracted and tired at 9 o'clock, um, I will redefine what when end of class should be. So we'll see that that students can, even though they may not have as much power in the situation, they are able to negotiate meanings. They're able to negotiate end and in some cases even start times to classes because of their behaviors and the way that they're communicating with the instructor. Because we live in this world where we're giving meanings to our symbols and it's because of our interactions, symbolic interactionists believe that we live in a world that is socially constructed. You'll hear sociologists constantly talk about, various ideas um, being a social construct, and that is literally because it is something that a person came up with, and that ultimately on the upside, we can change things. So this semester, when we're focusing on talking about organizations and social institutions, it is always inherently important, or I want to underline how important it is that you keep in mind that everything is a social construct, and that means ultimately we have the power to make things change. This theory, again, I believe I noted this at the very beginning, that it's a very micro level theory. And so this theory is very focused on how we see ourselves, because even the sense of a self is a symbol. Like who we are is a symbol, and we have to give meaning to it. And so how we see ourselves and ultimately how we feel about ourselves emerges through interaction with other people. This theory is going to be very focused on things like this idea of the looking glass self, a notion that Charles Cooley gave us over 100 years ago. And he basically said that we look to others to define who we are. We look to others like a mirror, and that tells us how we are doing in the world. So if when I am lecturing, which I find lecturing in front of people is a lot easier because I can see very clearly people's expressions. And as I look out, their expressions tell me whether or not I'm doing a good job or not. And ultimately, that makes me see myself as an instructor in a certain way. That makes sense. So this theory is going to focus also on how our sense of self then emerges, how we reflect our sense of self, how we portray ourselves to others, and then how, the enactment of our ideas of self. So, theories about dramaturgy is another big theory that comes out of the symbolic interactionist perspective and notions on the self. And dramaturgy, if you can hear drama, it literally says that we choose our behaviors and act them out. Literally, we're playing a role in this world. Okay, so that really is all I have to say. Not kind of a smooth finish to this discussion, but I do want you to do, I have a small activity for you just so I can see how you're getting it. Um, but go ahead, do the activity, and then we have one last theory to cover, and that's rationalism. So I will, or you will, catch me on the rationalism discussion. Talk to you soon.